circled back and reconnected, and at that point, my mom was just a few weeks off of a catastrophic hemorrhagic stroke.
Yeah.
Today, bless all of us and bless her and bless this technology, she's 422 days survived from the stroke, where the best doctors in Southern California and ourselves here convinced us that she had 3 days to live. Of course, we didn't accept that. So she has had, I'm going to say, let's just say hundreds of Theraphi sessions. And part of the progress in the journey has definitely been influenced by this technology, this man's work, and the graciousness of being able to basically work with her through this process. So I just had to give a very real, very raw first-person testimonial. I've seen it work with people who don't have stroke recovery challenges on a lot of levels, but she's here with us, growing and getting better and healing at levels that doctors have no explanation for. We're talking neurological, throughout the body, physiological, and in some ways she's healthier than before the stroke, and I'm happy to talk about that later if anybody wants to ask.
Yeah, great. Thank you, brother. Yeah, thank you. That was awesome. Well, hello, good evening, everybody. How's everybody enjoying the Conscious Life Expo so far?
We love it, and we just...
Isn't it? It's insane, yes. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about Theraphi and a little bit about future technologies tonight, and really what the basic underlying principles behind Theraphi, even though it's kind of been popularized and everybody has had some beneficial healing type aspects to it. I like to say that it's really just sort of a side effect of what it is. The primary concept behind Theraphi ultimately is a part of the evolution, conscious evolution, and an assisted in the consciousness. It's a consciously assisted technology because it utilizes plasma, and it utilizes plasma in a very special way, creating torsion fields with these counter-rotating plasma bulbs. Basically, at your head, you have a rotating, and this is a dual setup, looking down. But the top would be spinning clockwise, and the bottom spinning counterclockwise. So you're in this torsion field of plasma, and these tubes are fractal plasma antennas, and they're creating small little charge clusters or fractal toroidal moments that are very tiny corpuscles of electric charge, composed of an electrostatic field that gets gained through the fractal antenna. And these little plasmoids basically move all around you in a coherent manner. The whole system is based on phi ratio and designed to provide coherence. And the idea is to restore order from disorder. And we just set up a new website called Vitality. We've had websites have been around for a long time, like Roger Green's Theraphi.tech, and Vitality is sort of a new setup that we set up to be a platform, and we'll have stuff on Theraphi.tech too for some of the new technologies that I'm putting together and been working on for 10 years. It's been a long ride. It's been just over 10 years now since Theraphi has come out. There's thousands of them all over the world, many clinics and many centers. And because they are similar to light, how light works and how plasma works in the universe, every star in the universe is connected through a light tube, through plasma to each other star. And it's like a mycelium web of connections throughout the whole cosmos. The universe is 99.9% of universe is plasma. And so Theraphi is a means of accessing to that plasma network. So phi is sort of like the divine design and the tendency in nature to have beauty. Everything you see in phi ratio is said to be beautiful, but there's a very special thing about that particular ratio that allows energy to move and nature to work in a most efficient manner it can, because nature is kind of lazy and it says, why should I exert all this energy? And we can create all these things through the most efficient means. Which is what it does. And then totality describes the combination of every great life experience that one can have or witness all at once. So this word was coined by my beloved to sort of describe an ecstatic, blissful experience through this type of technology. So Basically, the Theraphi comes as a kit. I've talked a lot about it over the years, so we're just going to go through it just a little bit quickly here. Very important to understand the phi ratio and these particular angles. So the tube itself is based on that 72-36 degree angle that allows this fractal transmission of 3 spinning plasma fields that are spinning within those conductors at the top, and then they braid into a braid and they continue to spin towards the bottom. So we use this vortex technology, and everything in nature moves in a vortex and in spirals. And recently we've created a nice bed out of cherry wood that has no metal or anything like that, because metal will distort the field, so we try to keep that most coherent field we can within the Theraphi. So we have this organic latex and cotton bed all in cherry wood that is now available. And so one of the things when I used to work on Rife machines, and that we were destroying viruses and bacteria with certain frequencies and hitting them hard, sort of like overpowering them like an opera singer with a wine glass. And I always said, well, because we're working in these, we'd usually run around 20, 27, and Rife was running 27 megahertz, 28 megahertz in the early days too. How those frequencies are very long wavelengths because they're relatively low frequencies compared to small things like a virus or a bacteria. We're talking, microscopic and beyond. Very small size. How can a resonant frequency of that would be operating in a high terahertz, way above a terahertz frequency? So how could we be targeting these things? And I realized that in the plasma itself, it's creating a fractal system. So they become fractal antennas. And this is a paper on nonlinear plasma physics and how these fractals form. These are some actual electrodes. Like you see on the outer side, the rings that I put in the Theraphi. Originally I had internal electrodes that were like this, and you can see these plasma formations that form, and they'll move around with a magnetic field. Experimented a lot with creating plasma, basically lightning in a jar, and steering that lightning through magnetic fields and electromagnetic combinations between the bodies of the tubes itself. And this goes way back to even before Nikola Tesla. There were people like Raumkopf who came up with one of the original inductive coils to understand induction, and Faraday worked with coils as well. And later in Tesla started working with high voltage coils. He realized that there was health benefits to them. And so this is one of the presentations he gave at the 8th annual meeting for the Electrotherapeutic Association in 1898. Because back then they realized that electricity had a lot to do with health and the interface that they could do with electricity and healing. So Tesla said some theoretical possibilities offered by currents of very high frequency and observations which I casually made while pursuing experiments in alternating currents. And alternating currents are oscillating currents that he created with his coils, as well as a stimulating influence from the work of Hertz and the views put forth by Oliver Lodge. They determined me in some time during 1889 to enter a systematic investigation into this high-frequency phenomenon, and results soon reached were such to justify further efforts towards providing the laboratory with efficient means for carrying out on the research of this particular field. And he realized back then that this was a field that would be very popular, and it's going to lead to a lot of discoveries in healing. And basically Tesla said, I was able to take the technology, and it's up to the physicians to exactly understand what's happening within the body. And this has all been a long investigation over the years. We've known about radiation, X-rays and gamma rays, and they were slowly discovered back in Tesla's time when Röntgen and stuff were making the first X-ray tubes. They were using, tungsten electrodes and everything in those tubes, and they were emitting X-rays. They didn't know what they were doing, but they could see that they could expose film, much like Madame Curie with radiation and stuff. So everybody was sort of just discovering about this mysterious force called radiation and X-rays, and a lot of people got sick and a lot of people got poisoned because the X-rays, as there are cumulative poisoning and pinging off little bits of your DNA, so your cells corrupt and eventually you get cancer. So it happened a lot, and they happened through accidents, how they discovered how to be much safer with X-rays. So nowadays, the doctor will have a lead shield and go behind a lead wall, X-ray you with an X-ray tube up close. But there's various different types of radiation, just like there's different types of plasma that can be formed. These are a lot of different types of Tesla coils. These slides put together by Adrian Marsh of AM Innovations. And so this top left one is what Tesla called the magnifying transmitter in his Colorado Springs experiment. And then there's a vacuum tube Tesla coil, a solid state Tesla coil, and these are all running at different frequencies, but you can see all the variations of these different arcs. These are all hot streamers of plasma coming off of the electrodes on the Tesla coil. And they all have a particular type of radiation. So one of the unique things about the way Theraphi works is it's a much lower frequency and it's very coherent waveforms. So it seems to have some health benefits. And when you have erratic and incoherent things like these patterns come off here, even though many of these are fractal and kind of go along with golden mean discharges and that, they can actually be quite harmful. And it's very little understood and studied thing, but in Russia they're sort of light years ahead of us, as they are with many of these type of technologies. And they've written papers about the assessment of these biological effects of what they call strange radiation. Because in part of this high voltage, high potential interactions that can happen, when you concentrate these energies, they'll form into these highly dense condensed matter, and they'll actually do transmutations. There's enough energy, so everybody's heard about, you understands fusion reactors and what we have to do to create dangerous radioactive power systems with fusion reactions, and they're basically just boiling water with this amount of energy that comes out of these type of reactions. But in a low energy nuclear reaction, there's also different levels and types of radiation. So this is a paper on the assessment of this, what the Russians called strange radiation. And they noticed over the years that a lot of people that experimented with this technology and high-speed switching gear and stuff like that, big spark gaps and that, they ended up eventually getting different types of strange cancers, and many of them have died from them. So there's a term of this idea of this strange radiation, and then there's like low-level radiation that seems to be beneficial and healthy, and it's the same kind of radiation that you're getting from the cosmos, from the sun, and from the environment and everything around you that's very healthy and beneficial to the life force. And then there's higher energy states of these energies that will cause damage. And some of these low energy generations of strange radiation you can see with these nuclear emulsions, and these things make tracks because they're actually what Ken Schauberger's called an exotic vacuum object. They're highly condensed matter that has a self-contained magnetic field that moves through anything. So even if you have these things inside of a glass chamber or reactor, they'll come right out of the system, and they leave these little tracks on this emulsions. And we've seen this a lot over the years, and when you analyze it like these guys with Proton 21 did in Russia, they started putting very high pulses into an extreme electrical discharge onto these plates, and they were finding that there were transmuting elements. They created every element on the periodic table and more, and ones that don't really exist. And very interesting that someday we'll be able to utilize this technology. This all happens on a very nano scale. You have to look at everything on an electron scanning microscope, but we're understanding this now. We'll be able to scale this up, and ultimately it won't be, there'll be a time when we can build anything out of any materials we want. We'll be able to make a titanium bridge that will be really light and strong and never erode kind of thing. So there's a huge wide open area for all this kind of thing. Now, when I first heard about Proton 21, this must have been back in the 90s, I had some gold at that time, and I went, oh, there it goes, the price of gold. These guys are just going to be synthesizing gold and putting it out there, and I actually sold mine, kind of kicked my butt for that now, back when it was $500 an ounce. But needless to say, that technology actually kind of went dark, and that moved out of Russia and came to the U.S. and then kind of went off the map. But some of these papers, like the assessments of these biological effects of strange radiation, showing that some of these lower energy radiations, like the Theraphi is generating, are very helpful, very, very beneficial, creating order from disorder and taking, we use this term called time reversal. So when the cells are corrupted and becoming, into turning into cancer, basically we can reverse that process with this time reversal process. So these are some of the publications on strange radiation. And radiation now has its effects on the DNA. And we've done studies with the Theraphi and DNA in using DNA cultures and showing that it actually allows the DNA to unwind into a long strand, and then DNA will fold back up and go into an actual toroidal coil itself. So again, all of this stuff is fractal. It's scale invariant, and it goes all the way down to the very small to the very large thing. You zoom out into the cosmos, and we see these exact same patterns. Tesla said that the spinning, whirling energy of the universe is harnessable by mankind. So this is where we're talking about the 0 point and tapping into infinite energy, because we basically live in a sea of energy. And it's just a matter, it's not hard. Like, everybody thinks that we got to build these huge tokamak reactors and create these fusion events with dumping a lot of power, a lot of magnetism. And there's been, laser systems that use megawatts of power to create this little pulse to get a little teeny bit of energy. But it's kind of like, instead of hammering a nail into the wall, we're kind of picking up the whole wall and banging it against the nail on the end of the hammer, which is completely backwards. And Tesla realized this in the early days, and he said the spinning and whirling energy, which he called the wheelwork of nature, of the universe, is harnessable by mankind right now. We are whirling through space, in endless space, with an inconceivable speed all around us. Everything is spinning, everything is moving, everything there is energy. There must be some way of availing ourselves of this energy more directly than with the light obtained from this medium. We can, with the power derived from it, with every form of energy obtained without effort from this store, is forever inexhaustible. Humanity will advance with giant strides. The mere contemplation of these magnificent possibilities expands our minds and strengthens our hopes and fills our hearts with supreme light. And these are the pieces of the puzzle that we're putting together today. So these wavelengths of light, what we live in is a very tiny spectrum of the ultimate spectrum of electromagnetism and wavelengths of these frequencies. Everything is frequencies, and we can see in some of these, this little line here is our visible spectrum. That's all we see out of this wide spectrum, all the way down to very low vibrations like the Earth turning itself, all the way up to very fast things, X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic radiation. So there's all our radio waves and everything were just building blocks, and we eventually made systems that could go faster and faster, starting with vacuum tubes, basically like a switch. Then we evolved into the transistor and then as this technology got faster and faster, we would generate higher and higher frequencies. Then we got into the microwave range, and we were able to use microwave to send out signals that would bounce back for doing in military things, for tracking radar and that kind of thing. And then they evolved into now terahertz frequencies, that when you go through that airport and get scanned on that thing, that thing's running, we call those millimeter wavelengths. They're very short wavelengths. So like I was saying at the beginning, it's getting closer to how your cells in your body work. So that's why a lot of this radiation is very disruptive for the body. These are just simple tracks left from a laser welder. And what happens is these objects sort of get into this self-confining field, and they takes up some of the atoms that are off of some of the steel, and it turns into a highly spinning toroidal vortex, which is this little donut basically that is got a self-contained magnetic field, and it's actually sucking in energies. Some of these we can create, and they'll actually pull the chi right out of your body And people have been, especially some Russian researchers who worked with high spinning disks and things like that, have actually died from some of these type of energies. Of course, all this stuff has been weaponized and used, you know, in black projects and military projects. But there's a good side of all of this, and if we understand all this, as we're going to see what we're doing with it now, we're using it for good. But you can see some of these tracks. Picture if you had a spinning tire and you threw it up in the air and dropped it on the ground, it's going to go and burn out like that. That's some of these tracks that are left like that. And you definitely don't want to be in the way of this. That's why a lot of welders and stuff, they get little tracks through their eyes, and cancer is part of the process that can happen if you are exposed to that type of radiation for a really long time. But this is really the key to tapping the 0-point energy. So energy production, energy from matter, we're literally at that point when that high spin state is happening with all of these condensed matter materials spinning in that, we can actually evolve that matter and take this radiation and turn it into electricity or heat or something like that. So we can tap that matter. So we're able to pull actual energy from matter, and we can also create matter, use energy to create matter too, to make these different elements in the periodic table. So we're looking at transmutations and manifestations of things coming from nothing ultimately. This will lead to teleportation and moving things, and it's probably already been used already. Field propulsion, like anti-gravity craft for sure. So Tesla came up with one of these bulbs that he was using to create these shadow graphs. He made several different plasma bulbs, kind of like the ones in the Theraphi, and I've blown a lot of different glass tubes and created a lot of these things over the years. And Tesla created this shadow graph, is what it was called before they were called X-rays. And Rankin actually wrote to Tesla and said, I wish I could make my X-rays, and they didn't call them X-rays in those days, they called them cathode rays, because they realized that this beam of electrons was stemming off of the cathode. That evolved into the CR2 cathode ray tube from William Crookes's work. And so this was Tesla's foot in a shoe. And he did this back in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And recently, a few years back, this young fellow, Griffin Brock, recreated the Tesla's tube and started experimenting with it. And he calls it the Desmotron tube, the 1A21. And he created this great little package, just like the old vacuum tubes. And he recreated Tesla's X-ray with his own foot. And notice the clarity in all of this. This type of radiation that's coming from this tube is, so far from all our experiments, has not been harmful. It doesn't destroy any of the DNA because it uses these coherent wave packets of those structures in a columnar beam that's going straight out. And so it actually penetrates through matter and can be exposed on X-ray film. And in order to do this, we use this high-speed switch from an old-fashioned diathermy machine. This is a surgical electrotherapeutic apparatus from 1943 that we sort of had to reverse engineer and come up. I searched for years. These things sell for thousands of dollars. They're like collector's items, and they're extremely rare. So I kind of put it out there a year ago, and I just found one 2 days before we came here. That's a picture of it in the town next to me for $175. Yeah, so that's manifestation, and that's another thing that the Theraphi is capable of doing, is amplifying manifestation and intention. This is how it links into consciousness. This is how they were using the diathermy, and they still use it today, actually. It's for cauterizing wounds as you connect a scalpel to that high voltage probe, so you're basically zapping the person at the same time. And what it does is cauterizes the tissue very clean, so it doesn't bleed as you're in the surgery. There's modern versions of it. Because I didn't have that one at the time, I kind of had to reverse engineer it and use some of the plans from Adrian Marsh again to recreate the actual machine. Those are the spark gap electrodes on there. Those spark gaps, switch very fast, and they charge up these capacitors and run this coil. This coil is a combination of an Odin coil, who is sort of pre-Tesla, and a Tesla coil on the inside. And it produces these very high voltage terminals. So you have a low voltage and medium voltage, high voltage, and an extremely high voltage that they connected to the actual surgical instrument. And this is that terminal. And so these exotic vacuum objects need a very high volts to be produced. And so amazingly enough, this recreation that I made originally, I started playing with it, and I'll be darned if I wasn't shooting these exotic vacuum objects flying off of this terminal. And these are some of the photos. So these things are capable of penetrating through other matter. They'll basically tunnel right through steel. You could put a piece of steel sideways and a plate of steel. It'll go right through it and out the other side. Because as it's spinning in its magnetically self-confined field, it basically disrupts the metal lattice and then leaves it behind perfectly intact, or sometimes leaving a trace through it, and it'll go right through and out the other side. This is how these types of radiation, they're like quasi particles, and they're very intense. And so these are some other pictures of it, and that's the spark gap lighting up. Now that type of plasma is really hot, and those are emitting those exotic vacuum objects. These ones are the dangerous ones. These are the ones you don't want to be exposed to. They're ripping through you, and they're pinging off bits of your DNA. And Ken Shoulders, unfortunately, died from a strange cancer, but he worked a lot with these exotic vacuum objects. He worked a lot in these different projects that were sort of semi-dark projects, I suppose, that were not really known about or written about. Originally, he called it electrum validum because he thought that these were cloud clusters, charge clusters of pure electrons, really high numbers of electrons, and then later realized they were combinations of positrons, like ions, protons, and electrons, and they form these fields. And here, when you have this impact area, he would launch these things off. He built these little devices to launch these toroidal structures, and they'd accelerate into them, and they would, once they hit the metal, they would actually explode, and when they blew up, they released this strange radiation, and they would leave this impact, and in that impact mark, you would see transmutations of the elements. And they often travel in pairs. So going back to the ones that were coming off of here, you see this spiraling twist in the head of the, so during the frame capture in this particular frame, that exotic object moved that far, but it left a tracer, and they're twisting. And they're actually condensing so much matter into one of these highly condensed matters that it forms a black hole. And that black hole often has an opposite white hole. I was never a big believer in black holes and this whole idea of black holes out there in the universe. But now I'm starting to understand that really these black holes are everywhere. And the more we look into this, that's when the matter really collapses. It has its own gravitational field and a charge collapse in its own space-time, which is really amazing. So if we can understand and control these things, it leaves the door wide open for doing a lot of these type of technologies. So this is the impact plate of many of these types of exotic vacuum objects. And Ken Shoulders basically did this in the early 90s. You can see his patents. He was granted 5 patents. They were trying to take his patents, and they have this thing where they can use them for national security purposes. If you try to publish a patent, they'll take it and say, for national security, we're using this for our own military thing. But he kind of outsmarted them. He wrote his patents into a book and all his ideas and published it, sent it around to like 13 universities all around the world, and gave them all copies of it. So he kind of put out the information publicly before, as the patent was going through, and then they couldn't make it go dark again. He called it exotic vacuum objects. These are highly organized micron-sized clusters of electrons and protons, later learning, having the soliton behavior with the electron population density to the order of Avogadro's number. So the really high amounts of clusters of these electrons in a highly organized toroidal field. And these toroidal fields, you see them in nature. There's always been suppressed. This information has not been out there. It's getting out there a lot more. But if I type in this exotic vacuum object, I end up with a bunch of pictures of these fancy vacuums. So even the internet, that's on a Brave search, and the Google's a little bit better, but these are some of the beautiful shots of catching some of these little guys in flight. Professor Jan Rack, we were working with, who worked with CERN, he's a nuclear physicist. He did the next recreation of this diathermy type machine. And we went over to his lab last year in the Alchemy of Prague event that we do every couple of years with Roger Green. And this year we went with to Jan Rack's lab for their technical side. And I teach courses on practical alchemy and work with plant medicine and doing that, so that we had this advanced alchemy where we're working with transmutation of the elements and proving that the ancient philosophers and the alchemists were right. They were able to transmute these metals. And this is the apparatus set up with Griffin Brock's tube. And this is our first successful X-ray. It's still a little bit blurry, but we're fine-tuning and tweaking this machine. Now, this can be done, in this particular system, it's up close. Griffin was able to take that shot of his foot 6 feet away. And we're measuring that radiation coming from this tube at 1,000 feet away from the source. So right now, I'm working with some granite and limestone that was quarried from the Aswan quarry in Egypt to build a pyramid at my friend's place. He's a crazy guy who brought all these stones over from Egypt and built a pyramid, a scale-size model of the Giza pyramid, and we've been doing a lot of experiments with that. So we're working on sort of a ground penetrating radiation and the possibility that we might be able to see into these, what they've seen from those satellite images, very blurry images, into the underground of the pyramid in Giza. So we're exploring these possibilities right now. And we're trying to quantify exactly this type of radiation. Bob proposed the other day, Bob Greenier, who we also are working with, that these are neutral energy solitons, and these solitons are stable localized wave packets that maintain their shape and speed while propagating through a medium, even if they're interacting with other waves. So they make this columnar straight line like a beam of pencils. Tesla called it standing columnar waves. These same kind of waves you'll see in the Theraphi when we do that experiment in the fluorescent tube, and you see those longitudinal wave packets. But I designed those tubes to spread that out because I want it to move into more of this toroidal structure rather than a high concentration of these all in alignment like a laser coherent wave packets of these solitons. This is sort of a model of this thing. These fractal toroidals. But what they really do is this drawing is not quite correct because it kind of shows a toroid, and you'll see this commonly on the internet when people draw stuff like this, a toroid within a toroid within a toroid. You have to picture it more like this spin. The reason why it condenses matter, it actually folds in on itself. So it's curling and folding in on itself, and that's when it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. As they get tighter and tighter and tighter, they pull in other matter, and they have to feed on other things. When these things fly through the air, they'll join up and join together, and they'll start eating other things. So that's how you had to picture it. And we see this. Where do you see this? You see this over and over all throughout the cosmos. Every time you pour your coffee creamer into your cup, right, you see the cream spin, or you put a spoon into the thing, or you might have seen that video where they dip a Frisbee in a pool with food coloring, and it'll create these two counter vortices that'll travel in a toroidal field that go down to the bottom of the swimming pool and then pop back up the other end of the pool with the still spinning and come out. So that's how these things can travel through other dense mediums. This also can be seen in that Lord Kelvin kind of, you remember that pop gun thing that you pull back a membrane and you put smoke in it, it blows a smoke ring, or even just blowing a smoke ring with your mouth. Those smoke rings are these toroidal moments as well. These things are what connects everything in the universe. These are sort of light tubes that are connecting. You might have seen these big maps of the universe and zoomed way out, and then you look at a mycelium network going through the soil. It's all scale invariant, fractal, recursive, same patterns over and over again. That's because these magnetic lines of force, electrons like to spin around the lines of force. Magnets aren't the typical thing that you're taught in school where these lines of force are going around the magnet on the outside. They spin And there's a toroidal field that's actually coming out of the North Pole into the South Pole around a magnet. So these cosmic filaments join up with these light filaments, and every time they move beside, they have an electromagnetic attraction, so they'll form braids. And where do we see that? All the way down to your DNA. The DNA braids naturally just because it's going in the same charge attraction and magnetic field attraction. Everything in the universe is based on charge, and these opposites in charge, we live in this duality, and those opposite charges want to come together, but they build up such a field, intense field at some point, and this is how the proton and the electrons get really close, but they don't actually touch. So there's a force that keeps them apart, and we can explore that through these toroids. This is a giant cannon making these vortices, and this brings us back to ether theory. We really have to understand that the underlying matrix of all this is what they thought as the luminiferous ether in the early days, and we're going to go back to that theory real soon. We kind of voted with Bob on what to call these things and what's happening in this, and came up with this new term, coherent energy transformation, that these fractal toroids are doing. We met in Japan with Roger and this Professor Jan Rack and Bob Grenier. We went to the Cold Fusion Conference, ICCF, in Japan last year, and we took the Shinkansen, the high-speed bullet train there, and it was great. When we were standing in front of the train waiting to get on, Bob turns and says, "Our job is to make this thing run on Leonard." So that's a low-energy nuclear reaction, so cold fusion. Because ultimately, what I see we're leaning towards here is someday we're going to have this power, and it's all going to be contained in a very small thing. You'll have a little suitcase that you'll take with you. Maybe when you're born, you'll be assigned it. That's your energy for your entire life. It'll run your house. It's going to run your car. It's going to run everything you have. Now, the biggest problem here, guys, is like this technology has already been done, and it is available today. And but the reason why you don't have it yet is because we have to grow up here as a civilization and stop killing each other and doing stupid things, right? So it's like giving these bad monkeys like a time bomb, because in order to have that much power, obviously if you release that much power all at once, which we've done, creating nuclear bombs and stuff like this, and that's why our extraterrestrials, brothers and sisters and stuff like that, are just all standing back, shaking their head going, oh boy. The reason why they're not just showing up and saying, look, you gotta get over this, is because there's some kind of contract or something they have where they have to stand back and let us do what we're gonna do. So we're either gonna wipe ourselves all out, or we're gonna learn to get along and be able to develop these technologies. And then everybody's gonna be able to drive a flying car, and we'll be able to do, the worst thing is these bad monkeys get off this planet and get out there into space and start causing trouble out there. Then that's probably the biggest reason. So we're going through a bit of growing pains right now, and it's really rocky, but the good news is there's light on the other side. I think part of this is a true apocalypse, a lifting of the veil. That's what we're here for. That's what we're all trying to do, this evolution of consciousness. And now that we can see the state that we're in, it's time to just rebuild. And the problem with humanity is we don't have this vision. All our leaders are still trying to carry on in this old paradigm way. It's really important right now that we come up with a vision. What do you want? Do you want to have these flying cars? Do we want to be able to do this? As long as we can do it peacefully, we'll have it. And we just need proper people in place to have a vision and to get everybody together to work together towards that same vision and be able to do some amazing things with it.
Have some transparency so everybody can work on the
Yes,
same thing.
and the transparency's here. And for many years, I didn't talk about a lot of these things. I've worked on a lot of this stuff over the years, and I'm just starting to come out the laboratory closet. And I've built up quite an elaborate system. These are all old radios. You have to go back to the old technology to kind of discover some of these new things, because there's a lot of things that these are capable of doing that we missed along the way. So putting a lot of the pieces together, and I develop a lot of tube gear and radios, amplifiers, transmitters, and things like that. that are capable of utilizing these type of energies. So it's really funny that I think my low energy nuclear reactor, while these guys are building tokamaks and trying to do fusion energies, my goal is to build one out of vacuum tube technology to show how simple it can really be done. So this is our Alchemy of Prague event that we had this year when we did everything based on fungi this year. Every year we pick a different herb, a different topic. And in Prague, in the basement of where Edward Kelly and John Dee actually stayed with Rudolph II in the 16th century, we do practical alchemy there and advanced alchemy on the second weekend. And this is the tower where Edward Kelly actually built that. That's John Dee, who was a Elizabethan mage. And so this year in our advanced alchemy, we actually reproduced Takeaki Matsumoto, who was a Japanese nuclear physicist who everybody, all the other academics and stuff thought he was crazy. Back in the 90s, he did all kinds of experiments showing transmutation, low energy nuclear reactions. And we were really fortunate enough. Bob actually inherited, after he passed away, all his work and all his papers and documents, and has been reassembling this book. He has a crowdsource thing on Patreon or one of those kind of sites where we're reassembling all his original work into these documents and books that are available really soon. And we brought his family over, his grandson and his daughter, to Prague, and we created Matsumoto's transmutation experience. They didn't know what their father did. And grandfather, he worked in the nuclear plant, and then he'd go and do all this crazy stuff and come home and never talk about it. But when they realized it was really quite a special time. So we created some very simple transmutations using copper and lead, pure copper and lead, and all you need is a good source of hydrogen. So we're basically just using water. Very simple experiment that, well, this is actually, I might play it, it's a video. Where is it? There it is. This is in slow motion. We had some really high-speed cameras. Boom, there's the event. So this is basically putting about 120 volts, not much, it's a really sharp spike of current in there, and that's what you need, that high rise time current. And basically it's just a very thin lead wire in a solution with electrolyte. I think we use potassium hydroxide, and a copper plate. And kaboom, just one hit, just one spark. That's all it was. And then on the plate, it left this impact mark, and we put that in an electron scanning microscope. And yeah, there's a lot of lead splatter and all there, but lo and behold, we found all these other elements, primarily carbon, lots of carbon, big, huge carbon tracks, amazing ribbons of carbon that are actually graphene, single atom layer, thick rolls of, it's very hard to produce, very expensive. If you were to buy pure carbon nanotubes and material, well, there's some rolled out, just took seconds, pennies worth of material, some of the lead and some of the fractal patterns that goes into these balls. And then we had these little chips, hexagonal chips that came out. Unfortunately, we didn't get to, we only had the SEM for a little bit of time, and it takes time to scan these plates to find out what the other elements are in there. But we see silica, carbon, magnesium, lots of other elements. We weren't sure what these ones were, but note how they're sort of embedded in the material. So these are full hexagons, but they were teleported into this material. So there's your evidence of teleportation right there, and they freeze, much like the Philadelphia experiment. Remember the boat that they put into zero time, and when the men came back, they were embedded in the hull of the ship. This is exactly what's happening here. Yeah. So all this is done through vortices. Another great figure in history was Victor Schauberger, who worked a lot with these types of technology. So this is the difference, is that everything in nature operates in yin and yang in this duality that we're in. And he experimented with Vortex implosion technology. So we have explosion that we all know and love and drive our cars around with the explosive engines that are using hydrocarbons to explode hydrocarbons to produce energy, but we can use implosive techniques, and that's one of the secrets that we have here, and that's what Victor Schauberger births. So centrifugal energy that expands and contracts everything in the universe. What you're taught in school is that this universe is all spinning centrifugal, and it's eventually entropy is going to wear down, and then it's all going to come to a halt. But that's not true. It's a living, breathing universe that exhales and inhales in the centripetal movement. That's what's been hidden from you. That's what the rock you have to look under. Victor Schauberger knew that. He said, I think it would have been much better had Newton contemplated how the apple got up there in the first place. So you have to start thinking the other way around. So, yeah, lots about self-organization of plasmas. Victor Schauberger looked at these vortices and all these things. Michael Faraday, of course. I'm going to just rip through these slides because we only got a minute left. And Crookes and some of these early vacuum tubes. So Tesla, of course, J.J. Thomson. You have to go back to some of these early authors to understand about electricity. This is what we're trying to do, is build this massive, energy-intensive, this is the ITER, billions and billions and billions of dollars of a fission reactor that they're building in the south of France, spending taxpayers' dollars, trying to, take the wall and hit burn through this. But yeah, let's do a quick couple of questions.
Okay, I was just wondering if you could explain how your beds work.
The beds.
Yeah, the plasma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, basically, I've done so many talks on that. Like that's all out there. This is sort of the future of all that. But basically, what it's doing, it's creating those same structures, those same toroidal fields. Those are just little plasmoids, and that type of energy gets created all the time. When you walk across the floor and build up an electrostatic charge, and you touch the doorknob, and it releases this little spark, that is those plasmoids. So it's very incoherent, and a lot of electricity is erratic, and we call it static, and you pull things apart and you get that cling. If you were able to order those into a coherent waveform, which is what the Theraphi is essentially doing, because electricity, like the ancients have called it chi, prana, mana, all these things, it is the life force that animates us. We're electrical beings, and that all resonates with water too. Water is a key component in all of this. And the water fits in with this because it's a dipole molecule. It can form these complex fields. That's what structured water is. Water can form into all kinds of various geometries because the basic bond angle is at 108 degrees. That, again, another sacred number. You see that in Buddhism. There's 108 beads around the malas that everybody's wearing. All these kind of things, 108 incarnations and all these concepts over the years. That sacred number is because the bond molecule on that, and that fits in with the pentagram that we saw at the beginning, the 72 and the 36. Well, the 188 degrees is at the bottom of that pentagon. That is the key. All that phi ratio and everything like that is the key to the oneness that unites all things in the universe. That's why water is the life force of everything in the universe, why nothing can survive without water. And you remember when we were kids and they said, oh, there's no other water in the universe, like it's only here on Earth that's the only water in the entire universe. Just like there's no other life in the universe and we're the only ones, right? Again, more misinformation, disinformation to keep you from looking under the radar. Okay, so let's go back then to what I was flying through here. I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, so what happened was an important evolution in this idea of this radiation and what they used to call radiant matter. And I've tracked it back to Michael Faraday, I think, being the first to mention this radiant matter. And these guys also talked about the luminiferous ether. So this idea that there's an underlying ocean. When quantum mechanics kind of came out and gave Einstein a bit of a run for his money, they talked about the Dirac Sea, and all these people had different names for basically, they've just replaced this idea of, really Einstein, what he called space-time is basically the ether. And so Michael Faraday came up with this term radiant matter. He was the first to introduce this concept in 1816, and he was doing a series of lectures at the City Philosophical Society when he was 24 years old. Michael Faraday was not, he was a practical experimenter. He wasn't really educated, but he just was really into a brilliant scientist who they, saw his brilliance and basically let him have a lab and do a bunch of work. And he speculated about this hypothetical fourth state of matter, because at that time all they knew was solids, liquids, and gases. And so he called this fourth state of matter radiant matter. And it was the first understanding of what plasma was, basically. So he said it's a condition beyond the vaporization of gas where matter would exhibit these entirely new properties. And like I was saying about the fractality that appears in this in plasma, and the photonic emission that you're seeing from these highly exciting things, we can do it a few different ways. You can make extreme pressures, extreme heat, or extreme voltage potentials to create these plasmas. And plasma is really all around us. Like the sun is operating, the whole surface of the sun is a plasma field, and everything it's ejecting when it hits the earth, it comes in as the northern lights, the aurora borealis and the aurora australis, into the two poles of the earth. So this is how Theraphi works. Is I based it on everything that I observed in nature. Is like, how do you recreate the whole earth itself? How do you become the planet spinning within the field? So each of the tubes is spinning counter-rotating fields. Those fields are the same as the Earth, the North Pole and the South Pole. And the Coriolis effect, we know everything in the South spins one way and everything in the North spins the other way. So it was really just looking at like the Northern Lights and also being like the poles of a magnet, also being like a battery. And a battery and this idea of the ether, really what holds charge is this charge separation. What essentially a battery is just two poles in the earth, in the ether itself. So where there's a negative charge and a positive charge forming this polarity. It's basically an efficiency and a deficiency. And then light itself is also the same thing. It's just compression and rarefaction of the ether. It's just like sound. So sound's longitudinal wave. When my vocal cords are vibrating, they're vibrating the air, and that air is moving longitudinally to your ears as sound waves. These packets move in exactly the same way, and same with photons. And this whole idea of particle and wave duality and all that, we can kind of throw all that away because it's just a matter of density. All matter is really like frozen light. All those waves can move through the ether in those complex vortices within their wheels, within wheels, within wheels. And this has been written about, by ancient philosophers and in the Bible, Ezekiel, wheels, and all these kind of things. You hear the same story and over again. But all this cosmic sea that is like a endless potential. And once quantum mechanics came along, they called it the vacuum, zero-point vacuum background radiation, the understanding that there's this quantum foam, this background flux of energy, because this quantum foam is continuously moving in and out of existence all the time. So that amount of energy is available all around us all the time and creates all things. Everything's created from it. Everything's created from plasma. Like plasma is not just the fourth state of matter, it's actually the first state of matter. So we go into existence from what the alchemists called the prima materia, and you can picture the ether as being the prima materia. And then when those compressions of a pressure wave, much like my voice, or in the Theraphi's instance, the frequencies that are being put into it, create the compression waves. When I do that experiment with the fluorescent tube, and you see those waves moving longitudinally and you can steer them, and the idea is that those two waves are being emitted from the tubes and they cause a charge collapse right at the center, because all energy has to come from somewhere and has to go to somewhere. And they always say, energy can't be created and matter can't be created or destroyed. E equals mc squared, therefore there's a direct relation between the energy and the matter. That's all fine, but where does it come from and where does it go, right? So they'll give you this explanation of, well, you have a wire and a magnetic field, and the magnetic field moves past the wire and the electrons flow. Well, that's an explanation of what's happening. It's not the source. What's the source? It's kind of like the modern medical industry is like, we're always saying, oh, that's the problem and here's the cure, but it's not a cure. It's not curing the problem. It's just a Band-Aid, right? To mask the symptoms. So in science, it's the same way. We've always given these explanations that aren't getting to the core of things. The actual answer to that is, as you have a hydroelectric dam and you have water flowing through it, it's spinning that magnetic field around that wire. But what that's doing is churning the ether. And when you churn the ether, then charge gets created. It creates a potential between the center of the vortex and the centripetal center of the vortex and the outside. There's a charge differential. That's what Theraphi is doing. It's the exact opposite. So putting electricity into it to create the charge differential between the center of the vortex and the outer of the vortex, that's what's creating that fractal field that's emitting this radiation that you're absorbing that is beneficial. So that's the real answer. But then the other answer is like, okay, now that it goes into that charge collapse, where does it go? I think it was J.J. Thomson coming up here who called it the counter space, and where that energy has to go back somewhere. So where does it go back? It goes back into the ether to become part of that quantum flux, quantum foam in the background. So that's always there. And Tesla's idea was just how to amplify it, which obviously his coils do. They pull in that charge by creating that spin field in the ether, and then project it, and you see it as lightning. And yeah, so that's where it comes from, where it goes. And Sir William Crookes was one of Tesla's mentors. And so after Faraday introduced that concept, William Crookes came along and wrote a paper on radiant matter. And basically he came up with, he referenced back to Faraday and said, to throw light on this title of this lecture, I got to go back to 1816, when Faraday was just a mere student and ardent experimentalist at 24 years old. Early in this period of his career, he delivered a series of lectures on general properties of matter, and one of them bore this remarkable title on radiant matter. The great philosopher's notes in this lecture can be found in this paper, and basically he came up with what he termed cathode rays, because when he built these tubes, at that time there was a few glass blowers who were making vacuum type tubes. They found when they evacuated the air from the tube and put electricity into it, it created this radiant matter. And they experimented with putting all kinds of different things in here, like even gemstones and different elements in that, and like rubies, and they'd phosphoresce. So when you put a UV light next to a ruby and fluorescent minerals and stuff like that, you get a glow from them. So they started trying to encapsulate them in these tubes. And of course the radiometer that you've probably all seen that has those little diamonds, black and white, you put it in the sun and it spins around. Crookes made that as well. And eventually he came to this tube, which he realized that these rays coming off the off the cathode, because we didn't even know about electrons at this point, so they called basically the cathode and the anode, really it's the electrons that are coming off of the cathode, but originally they just called them cathode rays. And he found that he could put this metal piece inside of there, and it cast a shadow on the end of the tube. And that's what evolved into the television set and the cathode ray tube. So Crookes also used this term radiant matter in the late 19th century to describe this fourth state of matter in these highly evacuated tubes. And it essentially was plasma. And he believed that these rays were composed of charged particles forming a new state of matter that was totally distinct from solids, liquids, and gases. And so he was the one who basically came up with the idea of utilizing it and understanding what Faraday kind of showed was that could be manipulated with a magnetic field. And that got turned into the cathode ray tube that really Philo Farnsworth was the one who really sort of did most of the work on the early television sets. And eventually they could steer that beam really fast and make a picture, controlled picture. And Philo Farnsworth is another one you're not going to hear about, but he's like really did most of the work on the early days of the television, and RCA and Philco and those guys kind of took his stuff and made it popular, made millions and millions of dollars. Well, he kind of faded into obscurity, and that's what ends up happening with a lot of these people, kind of like Tesla as well. Yeah, and then there was J.J. Thomson, he was the first to realize that what it is coming off of these cathode rays were electrons. So he investigated this radiant matter through his work on cathode rays, which he identified as streams of negatively charged particles. His experiments demonstrated that these rays consisted of material particles. And Thomson showed that these cathode rays could be deflected by electric and magnetic fields, proving their charged nature. And he measured this mass. He actually measured the mass. He was the first to measure the mass to charge ratio of the electron. And so this is our first understanding of subatomic particles, ultimately. And he did this with this simple vacuum tube, putting this beam into these charged plates and deflecting deflecting that beam and measuring its density. That's a picture of the actual tube there. So what we're trying to create, or what modern science and all these big projects are trying to create, is they got the right idea because they realized that they needed this big donut to make this toroidal shape to move plasma through in order to create a fusion event. And basically you need massive magnetic fields to compress this plasma into such a state that actual atoms will fuse together. But again, it's using tons and tons of energy on a large scale. And so that Matsumoto experiment and all the other stuff I showed you, you can see how it's not a matter of a big force. You don't need a big hammer to whack this thing in. What you'd have to do is tickle the lattice of solids and liquids and gases, basically, to create these fusion events. And that's how nature does it. There's transmutations in elements all the time. They taught us in school that all the elements in the entire universe all came from the Big Bang. There was absolutely nothing, and then there was a speck of dust that just decided to poof, ignite into the entire cosmos, and all the elements were formed in that initial Big Bang. The guys who actually, the guy who came up with that theory, there was these other guys who thought it was so absurd that they were joking about it. They said, oh, it's just like a Big Bang, and they were kind of making a sexual innuendo, and he liked that name, and he went with it. So really that name was a joke to begin with, and that got adapted into our modern concepts. So the universe is continuously expanding and contracting. It's a breathing, living thing. And so we're spending billions and billions of dollars to make these huge reactors. This one here is like a joint effort called the ITER in the south of France between countries all over the world. And they're trying to make this massive, massive fusion reactor. And on the scale of what CERN has done with their stuff. So Tesla, basically, he had these visions. He could see everything inside of his head and make inventions and stuff like that. And when he was living, before he even came to America, he had a postcard of Niagara Falls, and he had this vision that someday he was going to go there and tap this wheel work of nature to be able to use the force of the water to generate fields. When he came up with this idea of an alternating electric field, he's like, Niagara Falls is the perfect place to do it. So he ended up coming to America, and first he worked with Edison, and Edison kind of scammed him out of a bunch of stuff and sidelined him, and he tried to discuss with Edison, his ideas, but of course Edison was all about DC, and Edison created bulbs too, but Edison had massive, teams of engineers that worked on all this things that he was working with, and spent a lot of energy tinkering and repeating the process and failing, right? Make a new electrode. Their biggest thing was to create the element inside the light bulb, and they went through millions and millions of iterations. Stayed up all day, all night. All these men worked to the bone, doing trial and failure. Tesla would think about it and visualize it all in his head, turn the wheels, make the machine work, and then he'd build it, and it worked exactly like he did. Same with his vacuum tubes. He'd make them, and they worked exactly like they did. So I actually had a chance this year to go to Niagara Falls in Ontario, and they had a Tesla display, and you can go and see the actual original generators that they built and put in there. And they had a big Tesla display, and they had a bunch of his clothes and all kinds of cool stuff there. Yeah, sorry.
Did he get a contract for
Yeah.
using Niagara Falls?
Yeah, they
Oh,
worked
he did get
together.
that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I forget the name of the fellow who was the main overseer of the project, but yeah, they used his generators and created the AC generation in there. So that's one of the switchboards. They had a giant Tesla coil, of course, up and suspended from the ceiling, and they shot some marks out one of the switchboards. But they had a lot of his original, hand-drawn patent applications, and his top hat and gloves, and his original immigration papers landing to America and coming into New York, totally penniless when he got here. And then his official American citizenship when he was granted, a statue of Tesla, and then there's a Tesla statue outside also, and I think it's on the U.S. side, this one, of him standing on the one of his alternating generators. So he said, the day science begins to study non-physical phenomenon, it will make more progress in 1 decade than all the previous centuries of existence. And so years ago, the philosophers were the scientists. Sort of like the idea that religion and science, they were separated at one point. They used to be together. The ancient philosophers, Plato and Pythagoras, and all these people throughout all the years, were the scientists of their day. They're the ones that understood nature. And the way they did it was by observing nature. And there was all kinds of spiritual principles. So spirituality and science were integrated. Even Crookes and all those guys in those days, it was all the way up to the late 1800s that they were very spiritual people. Crookes would, attend seances, and they did a lot of that spiritualism kind of thing, and there's secret societies and stuff like Madame Blavatsky and Theosophical Society. They were all interested in these sort of spiritual aspects that everybody's coming to today. But there was a time in the late 1800s, early 1900s when the powers that shouldn't be split that apart. They split the religion for power and control from the scientific thing, and then the religious people who didn't believe in the theory of evolution and all the stuff that the scientists were doing, and they created that schism, that divide, to keep us from unifying these two principles. And this is what Tesla's talking about here. We have to understand that this non-physical phenomena, once we're doing it, which we're all doing here, this is why we're here. This is what this Conscious Life Expo is all about, right? You guys are putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And so it's really important now that we remarry. And so this started happening with quantum mechanics, and we started understanding this, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and this quantum entanglement, and realizing that, everything is one. And so we are spiritual beings, we're light beings, we're plasma beings. We're connected to everything in the universe, and we're all connected to each other. Every time we look at each other and see each other through the eyes, we have these same plasmoid connection light tubes that connect us. And our spinal columns are transceiving antennas that are continuously receiving and transmitting these signals. High vibrations, when your hair starts to stand on end, and mine does when I talk about these kind of things, that feeling, that emotion is how we're all connected. And so understanding that the spiritual side of all of this is really important. This is how we're going to marry, this is how we're going to get through this bumpy road that we're on right now. And the reason why all the divisiveness, yeah, there's a lot of cosmic influences and there's really heavy astrological things happening right now. The sun is spewing out these massive solar flares. All that's influencing us, and it's actually altering our DNA, it's altering our consciousness, and it's a big part of it. And part of the reason why these it seems so divisive and everything's fighting right now is because it's just like a being birthing a child. We're on this cosmic rebirth cycle that's going to be this promised golden age that we've had repeated over and over throughout history, like the Yuga cycles, and ancient Sanskrit has written about this, has been written about in Taoism. It's been written over and over and over that this is just part of the cycles of the universe. So this is a really big one, and this is our opportunity, and we have to be careful because it kind of goes both ways. We don't want to blow it this time. Kind of like that Hopi prophecy where the train track's going and the train's on the road and it either goes downhill and crashes or it goes up and ascends, right? So this is a very critical point, and everybody, by coming here and doing what we're doing these days, is what we're meant to be doing. And so we have to look back to what these ancient philosophers were doing, and especially the alchemists. A lot of the keys are in the alchemy. It's all hidden in symbolism. It's all hidden before your very eyes, in fact. You can walk to any great building in Washington, D.C., and you'll see it in the architecture that they've taken from Greek architecture. Go back to any ancient civilization, and it's all in the artwork in ancient Mesopotamia, all the way through everything that we find, going back to the big one that we had last, when we had all this understanding and we were really enlightened, was Atlantis. Basically, you hear all these stories that when Atlantis fell, they were kind of at the point we're at right now. They had this power. There's a legend, like Edgar Cayce kind of told a lot of these stories in his psychic envisioning of what happened, but they had this two-eye stone, and it kind of gave them all the free energy they wanted. They were tapping into the 0 point. But then they got divided when they went through a cosmic cycle like we are now, and the divisious part split, and one group said, we want to take this two-eye stone and maybe crank it up maximum power just to see what happens, similar to us building a nuclear bomb and blowing it up in the upper atmosphere just to see what happens, or creating a massive particle collider just to blow things up and find out what happens, right? And ultimately it destabilized the planet, and Atlantis sunk and went under the water, as the story goes. They became rebirthed into Egypt, and so we know these ancient civilizations, our history has been erased. So after that Philadelphia experiment, it evolved into science. Well, basically what they were trying to do with that radar invisibility, they weren't really planning to make that ship physically invisible, but it ended up happening. And there's some tales, and this part of the story, I'm just going to tell stories at this point, and you have to do your own research and put some of these pieces together. And with everything I've said here tonight, I mean, ultimately it's up to you. The problem with being told that, as we're sort of taught in school, to not believe these things, or the idea of conspiracy theories and all that, and that you're not responsible enough to take this information, and this is the way the medical association works. So only trust the doctors, only the doctors know this stuff, and you shouldn't go there and try to figure these things out. It's the same thing with all these pieces of this story. And especially here, it kind of gets into this wild story, but basically the Montauk project was an extension of what happened in Philadelphia. So in 1943, when the Philadelphia experiment, when that ship went into 0 time and disappeared, there were 2 people on that ship that supposedly jumped off of that ship, and they went into 0 time. When the ship came back, everybody else was kind of in a displaced area where the ship was bobbing up and down, and some of the men got embedded into the hull of the ship, just like that chip that I showed you embedded in the copper. And but 2 people jumped over, and those people were Duncan Cameron and his brother. And this story of the Montauk project kind of goes into this really wild story. This is the military base that's out at the tip of Long Island, near a town called Montauk. It's called Camp Hero. And there's this SAGE radar dish that's out there. And a few years back, it was kind of always on my bucket list to actually go out there and check this out. So I said to Roger, why don't we put together a tour and take a bunch of people out there? And so Roger was like, all right, mate, and got this Merry Pranksters school bus. Somehow, funny enough, that was the same year that Ken Casey, his son, was restoring the original Merry Pranksters Ken Casey bus. And we met up and took Duncan Cameron, who was the operator, who's one of the guys who jumped off the ship, basically in a new body. And so it's kind of a story that he gets implanted into this new body in the future in 1983. But Duncan Cameron was the operator in the Montauk chair. And so we load up this bus with all these people. This was the recreation of Ken Casey's bus, and it just weird coincidence. That same year, they drove from San Francisco to New York, just like they did in 1960 whatever with the electric Kool-Aid acid test. And then this was our bus, and it was literally filled with all these beanbag chairs and everything like that. We all got on there, and the most amazing people showed up. You want to talk about strange synchronicities. I mean, here we are going to this secret military base that is the pinnacle of everything after World War II. All the Project Paperclip, all the Nazi scientists came in through the tip of New York, and that became NASA, Werner von Braun, all those guys. All our military industrial complex was based off a lot of this technology that came through from Germany and all the experiments that happened in Montauk. And Montauk, ultimately, there was a big part of MK Ultra, mind control experiments. They were also using this they knew that the extraterrestrials could steer their spaceships with their minds. So they wanted to be able to figure out how to do that, and they needed sensitive people. That's who Duncan was. He was this one on the left here. He was a sensitive, really beautiful guy and very emotional, and he could emote and feel a lot. So they used him to sit in the center of a large Delta T antenna that was buried underneath this SAGE radar dish that you'll see off in the background here. It was really crazy. We pull up into the parking lot and in this psychedelic bus, and we're all just kind of having lunch before we go. And basically this is a national park now, but it's still a military base that's supposed to be abandoned. But then you'll see all these things where there's massive power lines and transformers and stuff, and there's stuff deep underground. There's bunkers and all these things. And so all of a sudden, we show up on the radar, no pun intended, and this Toyota Corolla comes whipping out into the parking lot, and it's just a plain little car, and there's these two dudes in there, and it comes whipping into the parking lot, starts doing these donuts, and it's like, burning around. We're all looking out the window, and then all of a sudden it stops, and these two guys get out with these huge cameras, telephoto lenses like this, and they start walking around the bus. And they're taking pictures of everybody on the bus, and then they get in the car and they do these donuts, and they burn off and take off. Never seen them again. I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird. Welcome to the magical mystery tour, right? So we're like, okay, well, let's go. We get off this bus and we start. Yeah. Well, this is the crazy thing. I looked all over for these pictures, and I don't think I took any pictures. There's been many times when I had this thing where I just never took any pictures of these things. So fortunately, Roger, I emailed him the other day, and I was like, hey, do you still have those pictures from what we took? There's probably more. There's got to be some somewhere. We'll dig them up. But anyway, we get there, and there's this first bunker, and it's got concrete on it this thick. And a few years before this, you could literally walk in there before they sealed all this up. And so there's a few people that play a part in this story. And this Preston Nichols, who is a radio man who did a lot of the radio work. And this is all military, Air Force, and combination joint works that were secret black projects that they conducted out at this base for a long time. Initially, it started off in World War II. This was an over-horizon radar with underground submarine bases that were there at the tip of the island. That SAGE radar dish, inside of here is where they had the delta T antenna, and that's just a big octahedron basically. So it has an X, Y, and a Z. It's the same antennas that they later employed into the HARP project, that they can bend the upper atmosphere, and it becomes another type of super weapon. But anyway, Duncan would sit in this chair inside of this delta T antenna based under the ground here, and his thoughts were collected by this antenna and fed into a supercomputer and then projected into the SAGE radar, and they could project whatever he thought and felt out. So picture it as an extreme remote viewing and remote influencing system. They also were able to get Duncan to go wherever he wanted to go. They'd give him coordinates and points and times, and he'd go and relay his thoughts back, record into computer, and they were able to do this. Then they'd take that antenna and they turn it, because it's pointing out to the sea for over the horizon radar, but they used the town of Montauk as experimental zone, right? And they pointed at the town, and whatever they programmed him to think, he would think it, and people would react to it in the town. And it's a crazy story. So anyway, we start going off towards, and we split off from the main group, and started going up towards the tower. When we got to this chain link fence, whoop, I'm going the wrong way. We go up to the fence, and I'm like, go to climb over the fence, and then all of a sudden there's fresh grease on the top of the fence. And everywhere we're going, we noticed that there was signs of people activity going on there, but yet it still looks totally abandoned. But fortunately, we found another way over the fence, and it's like, well, what is brand new fresh grease doing on there? But just down in the bushes, the fence was kind of a little valley underneath, and so we were like, okay, well, let's slip in there. And we started getting closer to closer. And obviously, kids in the local area and stuff, there's a lot of graffiti, and people go out there, and they were ransacking things. The crazy thing is a lot of the infrastructure is still there. I got videos of Preston and those guys going out there just a few years before this, and I mean, there were racks of radios, all the transmitter equipment, all these things were there. This stuff was all the doors were wide open. You could go into all these buildings and see all these rooms. There's some rare footage that has kind of disappeared and got off the radio, but lately it's showed up on YouTube, and you can see some of the original footage that those guys put in there. So that's Alan and Roger at the tower, and we made it, and we went a little bit farther at that point, and that part will be part of another story. So just to go back to some other strange phenomenon, John Hutchinson, who's a friend and has done some crazy experiments over the years, you might have heard of him. We did a replication of one of John Hutchinson's experiments, where he's able to take metal and do the same kind of thing, integrating different metals and teleporting things into other things, disassociating metal, making it fall apart, transmutation of materials. So this is at my lab, and we did a live stream YouTube, first ever footage I ever showed of my actual laboratory, and we used the Theraphi for this process to create this giant fractal toroidal donut field of multiple tubes going to recreate what John did a lot back in the 90s. And of course, John collects all this similar kind of stuff. All the stuff that they used in the Montauk were old tube military radios like that. That's John back in the day when he lived in Vancouver, and this was all an apartment in a condo in Vancouver, a wooden condo where he had the chain. This whole place was filled with thousands of pounds of military radio gear that he had salvaged from off of the Navy ships, the Canadian Navy, that he had just got so fortunate to be able to help them disassemble it all. And then, this is out on this balcony. And a lot of crazy stuff happened in that building. Like when John would do those experiments, he had things levitate. He'd lift cannonballs and stuff like that. Had metal dissociate and fall apart. So his neighbors' doors would be opening and closing. Their, knickknacks and ornaments would levitate off their coffee table and stuff like that. And they'd be like, "John, what are you doing there?" These are some of the metal samples. a pure aluminum bar that completely fell apart. Now this didn't get hot or anything like this. In order to shred something like, it looks like it's been physically pulled apart, he used all these same kind of technologies using these exotic vacuum objects form inside of this metal. It creates magnetic monopoles. The monopoles kind of repel each other and go into their own zones, and then they fall apart. This is a bread knife that he set on top of a block of aluminum. So it's like a stainless steel kind of bread knife sitting on a block of aluminum, and iron and steel don't mix, or iron and aluminum, you know, just don't go together. This thing levitated or teleported, just like those little hexagon chips I showed you, into the metal. And then he cut in half to show you that the bread knife was embedded in the metal. This is his website. And recently, he just did a new Hutchinson effect experiment, and he's got a lot of new equipment and a lot of his old equipment, and ran these experiments with some of the new things. And people have been bugging him for years and years and years to recreate the experiment. And I think what we did with Bob was to try and encourage him to do that. We had one small effect towards the end that was totally unexpected. We had a pair of pliers that kind of fell apart. But John just recently recreated it, and I ended up getting these samples from him, so I have all these pieces now of recent ones. That's a file that completely bent and some aluminum rings. He put these coins on top of that block of aluminum, and they didn't sink in, but they left an imprint in it, and the coins are all dented. And yeah, so that's kind of what's going on lately. This was just the other day. You can go and see that online. And that's, John uses electrostatic fields created by large Van de Graaff generators. This is the one we used in my beloved on there, 5 million volts of DC running through her. This is a therodynamometer. That's just a new product that I come out to be able to measure these type of fields. And this is going to be updated pretty quick on our website, and it's going to be available, but you'll be able to measure these type of effects and fields. And yeah, so ultimately the idea is, how do we capture this? Lightning into a jar and build that suitcase and have infinite energy, teleportation, levitation, all these things. There's a lot of people out there researching, and hopefully there's more people like me that are out there that have never wanted to come out and talk about this stuff, and now's the time. I'm actually looking to collaborate with other people, and if anybody is really into this and doing serious stuff, I think at this point, give me a call, because there's a lot going on, and I think if we all start to collaborate and work together, we can do some cool stuff. So, yeah, so I'll take a couple quick questions then. We've got 5 minutes. Okay, thanks. There's testimonials and stuff out there that you'll hear. We can't, like me as the person behind Theraphi, can't really say anything like that or make any claims, but just ask other people. Theraphi is grown by word of mouth. It's just people trying it. They liked it. They said, I wanted to get one for myself. So, sorry, there's one here first. He ended up moving down to the States, and he's been here for a long time, and he's built up an even bigger, better laboratory. Yeah, he's in Northern California. Yeah.
Okay, what was I? Okay,
Yeah.
I know what my question was. On your beds that I guess his mother has been doing.
Yeah.
How often is it recommended that you do that? In other words, in her situation,
Right.
it might be a different amount
In a
than
really,
somebody else.
in a chronic situations like that, we'll run at least an hour a day, maybe a little more than an hour per day, 5 days on, 2 days off. I'm not sure what your protocol was, Farsam. How long did you run for in period?
Sessions up to 90 minutes.
Yeah.
7 days a week.
7 days a week.
Some days,
Yeah.
some weeks off too.
Yeah.
But definitely pretty consistent.
Yeah, so 60 to 90 minutes, 7 days a week. Yeah, right on. That's good to know. Yeah, for sure. Okay, excellent.
You don't feel anything.
Is it a good idea to maybe do a PEF mat while doing the Theraphi, or is that not recommended?
So here's the thing about magnetic fields. So as we saw with all these slides, magnetic fields interfaces with the plasma quite a bit, right? So when you create these little micro charge clusters, these exotic vacuum objects that basically fill your body in a coherent form, you don't want to disturb that equal coherent distribution. Large magnetic fields will do that. So if you're going to do any kind of PEMF or whatever, you do that before the Theraphi, and then you're blowing out the blockages, you're blowing out that calcination and all that kind of stuff with your pulsed magnetic fields. Then you rebuild with the Theraphi. So in most cases, and there's a lot of people that stack these type of technologies, but Theraphi is like the final polisher. And that's how I look at it, just the final polishing, and leave you with a good positive charge. Like we'll leave you with this great positive moment at this time. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.